The president said the war was nearly over. Iran launched missiles at Israel the same night. That is not a contradiction you can explain away. That is not a messaging problem or a gap in communication. That is the distance between what is being claimed from the most powerful podium on earth and what is actually happening on the ground. And that distance, 33 days into this war, is growing. Let's go back to the evening of April 2nd. The White House staging was deliberate. Dark suit, American flags flanking the podium, the kind of formal framing that signals gravity, that signals this matters, pay attention. 33 days after the first strikes on Iran, the President of the United States addressed the nation in prime time for the first time since the war began. 33 days of silence from that podium, and then this. He said Iran's navy had been destroyed. He said the Air Force was in ruins. He said Iran's top leaders were dead, its missile capability dramatically curtailed, and the nuclear threat, the whole reason this war was sold to the American public, neutralized. He said the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which 1/5 of the world's oil and gas moved before this war began, would open again naturally and soon. He said the war would be over in 2 to 3 weeks. It was a remarkable speech. Confident, sweeping, built for the kind of headline that reassures markets, quiets critics, and lets a president exhale. And then the night continued. Within hours of the speech ending, Iran launched a missile barrage at Israel. Air raid sirens cut across southern Israel while the president's words were still echoing on cable news. That same day, April 2nd, the day of the speech of reassurance, the United Arab Emirates intercepted 5 ballistic missiles and 35 drones. Not in total since the war began. That day alone, Saudi Arabia intercepted drones. Bahrain reported fires from Iranian aggression on its territory. A tanker was struck off the coast of Qatar. The Houthis, operating from Yemen, fired another barrage into the Gulf shipping lanes. Israeli strikes killed at least 50 people in Lebanon. The war did not get the message. Now here is what makes this moment so significant and why it matters beyond the immediate shock of the contrast. Presidential speeches about ongoing wars are not just communications, they are policy signals. When a president says the strait will open naturally, other governments have to decide whether to wait for that to happen or to act themselves. When a president says missile capability has been dramatically curtailed, military planners in allied capitals have to decide whether to believe that assessment or trust their own. When a president says 2 to 3 more weeks, bond markets, oil traders, shipping companies, and insurance underwriters all make decisions based on that timeline. Every one of those decisions, made on the basis of what was said on April 2nd, is now being made on false ground. The numbers tell a story the speech did not. Before this war began, the average gallon of gasoline in the United States cost $2.46. 33 days later, it costs more than $4. That is a 63% increase in a single month. The S&P 500 fell more than 5% through March. Bank of America is forecasting elevated oil prices through the end of 2026. These are not abstractions. They are the receipts that ordinary Americans are holding in their hands every time they fill their tank or check their retirement account. The morning after the speech, markets answered with their own verdict. Brent crude surged more than 6%. Asian indices fell across the board. Treasury yields climbed. Analysts who had been waiting for the speech to deliver clarity said, on the record, that it delivered far less than expected. The gap between the claim and the reality was so visible that financial markets priced it in before breakfast. 13 American service members have been killed in 33 days. More than 3,000 people are dead across the region. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. On the Tuesday before the speech, not a single oil tanker transited it. The U.S. Navy itself has not transited the strait during the conflict because of Iranian mines, coastal defense batteries, and drone swarms that make passage genuinely dangerous. 2 to 3 weeks, the president said. He said the same thing 1 week earlier. The April 6th deadline, now 4 days away, has already been extended twice. So the question the speech did not answer is the one that matters most. If the war is nearly over, why does the evidence point in exactly the opposite direction? Let's take the speech apart. Not the tone, not the politics, the specific claims, one by one. Because when a president makes factual assertions about an active war, those assertions can be checked. Start with the most dramatic one. Iran's missile capability has been dramatically curtailed. On the night of April 2nd, the same night those words were spoken, Iran launched a missile barrage at Israel. The United Arab Emirates, since the opening of this conflict, has intercepted 438 ballistic missiles, 19 cruise missiles, and 2,012 drones. That is the intercept count for a single Gulf state. Not the region, not NATO combined, one country. And intercepts are not a sign of a neutralized threat. Intercepts are evidence that the threat is active, continuous, and voluminous enough to require constant air defense at scale. A curtailed missile capability does not produce those numbers. A curtailed missile capability does not launch on the night of its own eulogy. Move to the nuclear claim. The president said Iran was standing at the doorstep of a nuclear weapon and that the strikes had neutralized that threat. The United States intelligence community released its worldwide threat assessment on March 18th, 2 weeks before the speech. It described Iran as attempting to recover from severe damage to its nuclear infrastructure, not assembling a weapon, not at a doorstep, recovering. The distinction matters enormously because the gap between those two descriptions is the gap between a war that solved an imminent crisis and a war that may have accelerated a desperate one. A country trying to reconstitute destroyed nuclear infrastructure under military pressure does not become less motivated to build a deterrent. It becomes more. The claim about regime change is the most consequential and the least supported. The president said Iran's original leadership was dead and that the regime had effectively been replaced. Iran is still governed by regime remnants. There is no alternative authority. There is no transitional government waiting in the wings, no exiled political structure with domestic legitimacy, no institution capable of filling the vacuum that a decapitated theocratic state would leave. Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, someone with full access to classified briefings, stated publicly that there is still no plan for Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, that its remaining missiles are still a threat, and that the strait is still closed. These are not opposition talking points. These are the unresolved operational questions of a war that was presented as nearly concluded. Warner raised one more detail that deserves its own paragraph. While the United States is conducting strikes against Iran, it is simultaneously easing oil sanctions, sending billions of dollars in unfrozen assets back to the very government it is fighting. That is not a contradiction that can be easily resolved. It suggests either that the administration does not believe its own claims about regime change, or that the financial architecture of the conflict has not caught up with its military ambitions. Either explanation is alarming. Now the strait. The president said it would open naturally, and suggested that allies who want access to it should just take it. European capitals reacted to that phrase with quiet alarm. Here is why. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 miles wide at its narrowest point. It is bordered by Iran on one side and Oman and the UAE on the other. Iran has spent decades building layered defenses specifically designed to deny access to that corridor. Mines, fast attack boats, coastal missile batteries, drone swarms. The U.S. Navy, with the most sophisticated naval force in human history, has not transited the strait during this conflict. That is not a political choice. That is a military judgment about the cost of attempting it. 35 countries have now signed a British-led maritime security statement on the strait. Britain is organizing the international response, not the United States. Britain. That detail, almost unreported in American media, tells you more about the actual state of the alliance than any press conference has. Then the economy. The president's speech was partly designed to reassure financial markets that the pain was temporary and the end was near. Markets listened, evaluated, and immediately sold off. Brent crude up more than 6%. Asian equities down across the board. Treasury yields climbing. The analysts who cover energy and geopolitical risk for a living, people whose job is to price reality, not narrative, said the speech delivered far less than expected. Gas at $4 a gallon is not an abstraction for the 35% of Americans who told pollsters they approve of this president's handling of the economy. It is the number on the pump. It is the most honest poll there is. Every claim held against the evidence does not hold, which raises the harder question, the one that goes beyond facts and into intention. If the intelligence assessments don't support the nuclear claim, if the missile barrages don't support the curtailment claim, if the markets don't support the economic claim, and if no allied government is prepared to just take the strait, then what exactly is the strategy for the weeks ahead? On the same day the president delivered his speech of reassurance, he said he was strongly considering pulling the United States out of NATO. Hold that thought. 33 days into an active war, with the Strait of Hormuz closed, oil at $118 a barrel, and missile barrages flying the night of his own primetime address, the President of the United States publicly floated withdrawing from the most consequential military alliance in modern history. His reason: allies didn't join the war on Iran. Secretary Rubio confirmed the sentiment, saying the American relationship with NATO requires re-examination. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is scheduled to visit the White House the following week. That meeting, whatever it produces publicly, will be one of the most important diplomatic conversations of the decade, and it is happening in the shadow of a threat that was spoken aloud by the American president. This is not a negotiating posture, or rather, even if it is meant as one, the countries receiving it cannot afford to treat it that way. When the United States signals it may abandon collective defense, every government from Warsaw to Tallinn to Seoul begins quietly recalculating. Alliance credibility is not rebuilt in a press conference. It dissolves slowly, then suddenly, and the dissolution does not announce itself. Now go back one day further. April 1st. Ali Larijani was killed in a U.S.-Israeli strike. If that name is unfamiliar, here is why it matters. Larijani was the back channel. He was the Iranian official being used to facilitate quiet diplomacy, including a potential meeting between Iranian representatives and Vice President J.D. Vance. He was the thread connecting two governments that have no formal diplomatic relationship in the middle of a shooting war, trying to find a corridor towards something that wasn't total collapse. That thread was cut by a missile on April 1st. Iran called it a deliberate attempt to destroy diplomacy. Whether or not that characterization is accurate, the practical effect is identical. The man who could have been the bridge is dead. Iran's foreign ministry publicly denied Trump's claim that Iran's president had requested a ceasefire. Iran's president released a letter stating that Iran posed no threat to the United States or to neighboring peoples. These are not the statements of a government on the verge of surrender. They are the statements of a government managing its own domestic narrative while its back-channel envoy lies in the rubble of a strike that the United States authorized. The space for negotiation, already narrow, just got narrower. Here is what that means at the strategic level. The stated end condition of this war, A non-nuclear Iran, an open strait, and a stable regional order requires either a negotiated framework or a ground campaign. There is no third option. Air power alone does not hold territory, does not secure nuclear material, and does not install governments. The president has said repeatedly there will be no ground troops. 68% of Americans agree with him. They oppose ground forces. But without ground forces and without a diplomatic channel, the war can degrade Iran further without resolving any of the four core questions. When does the strait open? Who controls it after? What happens to Iran's enriched uranium? What does Iranian governance look like when the strikes stop? The speech on April 2nd did not answer a single one of them. The domestic numbers are now as stark as the battlefield ones. Overall approval at 35%. Economic approval at 31%. Only 34% approve of the military action in Iran. Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a traditional critic of this president, not someone given to opposition for its own sake, broke publicly with the administration after the speech, saying it contained nothing to lower the cost of living. When the political coalition that elected you is publicly expressing doubt, the margin for a clean narrative has closed. 33 days, 3,000 people dead across the region, 13 American service members killed. The strait still closed. Oil at $118 a barrel. A back-channel envoy dead. A NATO threat spoken aloud. A deadline extended twice and now 4 days away. And a speech that promised resolution in 2 to 3 weeks. The same promise, using the same words, that was made 1 week earlier. The gap between what is being claimed and what the evidence shows is not static. It is not a fixed distance that can be managed with better messaging or sharper framing. It is widening. Every missile Iran launches the night of its own funeral widens it. Every dollar crude climbs widens it. Every allied capital that organizes its own maritime coalition because it cannot wait for American leadership widens it. Wars have their own logic. They do not pause for speeches. They do not honor deadlines set in press briefings. They move on the ground, in the water, through the air, and the world watches the distance grow between the story being told and the story actually unfolding. That distance is the story, and it is not finished yet.